Good afternoon, everybody, and you're very welcome to today's Radio Centre Ireland webinar. And I'm delighted that in partnership with research company Colour Text, we're introducing some new invaluable research on really how we evaluate audio advertising effectiveness and really give insights into how audio campaigns are performing. So I'm really excited to bring these insights to you. But before we delve into the research, I wanted just to remind you all of existing Radio Centre Ireland research that is available to you. So I just want to spend a few minutes reminding you of the resources and tools that are available to you. And these are research projects that have happened within the last year. The first one I want to remind you about is the Irish Audio Market Report. I think this is a really very significant piece of research because it's the one single source piece of research in Ireland that measures all form of audio consumption. It measures live radio, it measures streaming, it measures podcasts, and it even measures owned music such as vinyls or downloads. So I think it's a really, really valuable piece of insight in terms of the total audio market. And what it does is, I think is a really important piece of insight, is what I call or determine share of ear. So it measures the percentage of time spent with each individual audio platform. So for example, what that research shows that 71% of all audio listening is to live radio. But it also then measures the percentage of listening that is accounted by streaming, percentage listening that is accounted by podcast listening, and also the percentage of listening that is owned listening to podcast I should say vinyl and downloads. So I think it's really a starting point, I think, for a lot of people when they're planning audio to use this piece of research to understand how consumers listen to all forms of audio and then plan from that point on. And I think a second piece of research that's very complementary to that first piece of research is another piece of research that was launched last October called Generation Audio. And in the backdrop of increased audio listening, what this research does is understand why people listen to audio and why they listen to different types of audio. So why do consumers listen to live radio? What's the need state that serves? Why do people listen to podcasting? And why do people listen to streaming? And that research produced 7 need states. And the research also delves into each need state and how it is served by different platforms. So I think it's a really, really interesting piece of research. And what the overall research shows is that rather than being competing with each other, that live radio, podcasting, and streaming actually often play a complementary role, an additive role to consumers' listening experience. A third piece of research that we have developed in the last year is the Campaign FX Performance Multiplier. And the key question here was, how does audio work in terms of performance, in terms of responses? In particular, how does audio drive responses online, particularly in terms of website traffic? So this piece of research, we partnered with Sky and we got details in terms of Sky's analytics, and it produced really fascinating insights. One is that for that particular campaign, 72% of website traffic to the landing page for that campaign was attributable to the radio activity. And even more interesting, I think this is a global insight that never been, this research had never been done anywhere in the world. What it showed is that the response levels to a radio spot or an audio spot don't happen immediately. They happen over an extended period of time. So a spot may go out, but you will have response levels up to 24 hours after that spot has been transmitted. And I think that's really key. We term that the attribution halo. And in fact, in the UK, Radio Centre UK have done extra work that followed on from the work that we did. And they also produced very similar insights. In their research, only 6% of responses to an audio spot happened in the first 15 minutes. The rest of the responses happened over a 19-hour period. So again, a very interesting piece of research that again is available to you. Then going on to creative, this piece of research really looked at what's the characteristics to make a brilliant audio creative. And in this case, we partnered with System One to look at what characteristics of an audio ad drive long-term effectiveness. And the insights of the conclusion from that is that ads that have right brain features tend to perform much better. What I mean by right brain features: context, dialogue, storytelling, wordplay, music, those really interesting features. They are the elements that drove long-term effectiveness for audio creative. And then following that piece of research, we followed up with an initiative with System One that allows anybody in Ireland to test their audio ad, either test an ad that hasn't aired or test an ad that is airing, and you can able to see that research in practice, and you are able to evaluate your own audio creative and make changes and make amendments to make sure it is as effective as possible. So that's 5 really very valuable pieces of research. They're all on the Radio Centre Ireland website. You can reach out to me if you can't find it, and I can happily talk through any elements of that research. Or indeed, if you want the Radio Centre Ireland to present directly to you or to your teams, we are very happy to do so. So again, please reach out to me and I can arrange that. So following those 5 pieces of research, what today is about is adding to that bank of knowledge. And what today is about is to really understand something we haven't looked at up until now, which was, how does audio perform in terms of the type of metrics that people are very familiar with? Brand awareness, brand consideration, purchase intent. So we have a huge array of data in terms of this research project to go through today, to look at the insights that this piece of research is delivering. And I am delighted that we are going to now hear from Jason Brownlee, who is the CEO and founder of Colortext, which is the research company that has delivered this research. He's going to talk through the background to how the research was conducted, and can talk through the valuable insights that it delivers. So over to you, Jason.
Thank you very much, Kieran. Just a quick confirmation. Everyone can see me okay? Good. Great. Okay, so it's great to be with you all this afternoon, and I'm going to talk about the Campaign FX research that we've been conducting now over the last half year, there or thereabouts. So, to begin, Campaign FX. It's a new research study designed specifically for the Irish market. And it's building upon 17 years of experience from the successful Radio Gauge initiative in the UK. Created by Radio Centre Ireland in partnership with Colortext, it's designed to evaluate the effectiveness of audio advertising, and Campaign FX aims to provide Irish advertisers with deeper insights into how their audio campaigns are performing. Now, much like Radio Gauge in the UK, Campaign FX here in Ireland measures key performance metrics such as advertising awareness, brand consideration, and purchase intent. This gives brands in Ireland unprecedented levels of analysis into the impact of audio advertising on listener behaviour and brand perception. As part of this mission to improve the general understanding of radio and audio's effectiveness as an advertising medium, we've undertaken a substantial meta-analysis of all the data collected by Campaign FX to date. So far, we've undertaken 5 individual waves of research, with each survey contacting an average of 750 Irish consumers aged between 18 and 64. The meta-analysis we're going to look at today aggregates these studies into a database of over 3,750 individual interviews, providing detailed information about 31 major brand advertisers in Ireland. So far as we're aware, this is now the largest meta-analysis of audio advertising effectiveness data ever undertaken in Ireland, and needless to say, we're very excited to be able to share the findings of the study with you here now. So let's begin with a quick look at the breadth and depth of data collected by Campaign FX so far. Our survey programme began back in September last year, with a detailed look at 7 brands in the personal banking sector. This was followed by TV and video streaming brands in October, and the fast food and delivery category in November last year. We took a break over the Christmas period in December, and then we resumed again in January this year with a survey of 7 general insurance brands, followed in February by health insurance, which is the final advertiser category for this tranche of survey activity. Now, I have to stress at this point, we didn't know at the moment in time when each category survey went into the field what brands would or would not be advertising on the radio. This meant we could capture the most natural snapshot possible of advertising activity by leading brands within each category and across all media channels. And we think this gives the Campaign FX data aggregated into our meta-analysis an extra measure of authenticity and real-world credibility. Next, we're going to take a look at how we've organised this data and gone about the process of analysing it. Campaign FX is based upon the respected test versus control research methodology used by studies like Radio Gauge in the UK. However, this approach has been carefully modified for the Irish market by using, and forgive me here, it's quite a mouthful, a stratified 2-factor test versus control sample and analysis scheme, which I'd like to gently walk you through right now, and bear with me because it will be helpful. So let's begin simply enough by identifying each of the brands that was on air with a radio campaign at the time we ran a survey for each of the respective categories. This allows us to split the 31 brands we have data for into 2 clear groups that you can see here. On the left, we have brands that were advertising on the radio, and on the right are the brands that were not on air at the time of survey. So to make things a little bit easier, we're now going to switch over to this simplified diagram, which splits the brands we have data for into the 2 groups we've just looked at. Focusing first on the brands that were advertising on radio when our surveys were conducted, all of the people who took part in each study were split into 2 groups, which we have added here. The test group is made up of people with the heaviest exposure to radio advertising. These are defined as average and heavy radio listeners. Conversely, the control group on the right is made up of people with little or no exposure to radio advertising. These are defined as light and non-listeners to radio. Now, to make the next steps of the methodology easier to explain, I'm going to use some real numbers. One of the questions we ask measures how much advertising awareness each brand has managed to generate for itself. In this case, amongst people with higher levels of exposure to radio advertising, the test group, the average level of ad awareness for brands using radio was 40.5%. Now, that compares to a figure of just 30.5% amongst people with the lowest levels of exposure to radio advertising, which of course is our control group. Well, what does this mean? The level of ad awareness we see for the control group is what we can expect for people exposed to the advertising brands have done on all other media channels, excluding radio. Remember, these are the people with the lowest or no exposure to radio. If we see an uplift, therefore, in the test group's level of ad awareness compared to the control group, we can then reasonably attribute the increase to the test group's radio advertising exposure. Now, in this case, the test group score is 10 percentage points higher than the score posted by the control group. And if you happen to have a calculator handy, you can work out that happens to be 33.1% higher than the control group score. And that is what we call the uplift rate. So now we know how to calculate the uplift rates in ad awareness for brands that have been advertising on the radio. We can, of course, do the same thing for brands that have not been advertising on the radio, which you can now see here added on the right. In this case, the uplift rate for brands not using radio is just 26.3%. And when we compare that to the 33.1% uplift rate on the left, we can see that on average, advertising awareness for brands that have been active on the radio is actually 26% higher than for brands not using radio, which of course is a great finding. And we can perform that same pattern of analysis and calculation for all the other metrics in the campaign effects database. To make the meta-analysis easy to read, from here on in, we're going to illustrate the uplifts achieved by radio advertisers with this simple chart format. Now, in this case, it repeats the finding we just looked at in closer detail. It shows the 26% uplift in ad awareness for radio advertisers indexed against the baseline established by brands not using radio. Having now explained the methodology using this example, I think we should perhaps move on to say something more interesting about the significance of this first finding. The first headline finding of our meta-analysis is that radio and audio generally helps to create future customer demand for brands. Let's explain this in detail. Thanks to the analysis of the IPA Effectiveness Data Bank conducted by Les Binnett and Peter Field over the last decade, it's now generally accepted that most successful marketing strategies use a mixture of long-term brand building combined with shorter-term activation activity. As the simple model here shows, brand building generally relates to creating future demand, which is a process that seeks to pre-prime future customers who won't enter a market until some point in the near or distant future. Related to this, and moving down the diagram, we can understand activation activity to be a process where brands aim to convert existing market demand by grabbing, hopefully, an unfair share of ready-to-purchase customers. It's within this context that our meta-analysis of campaign FX data aims to help us understand the role that audio can play in both of the two main roles of marketing. So let's begin by looking at what the meta-analysis reveals about radio's contribution to creating future demand. Here is the finding from our earlier example, which shows that advertising awareness is 26% higher for brands that advertise on radio. Ad awareness is a crucial metric that measures the extent to which consumers are familiar with a brand's advertising. This is reflected by the question we use, which asks, have you seen or heard any advertising for these brands recently? Long-term studies like Radio Gauge in the UK have found that ad awareness seems to be particularly sensitive to the effects of radio campaigns, and it's reasonable to ask why. Historically, exposure to audio advertising has been shown to boost awareness of a brand's marketing activity across other media channels. This is often called audio's virtual TV or virtual digital effect, and we can see clear evidence for that here. Most marketing theorists would agree that boosting ad awareness across large audiences is a key objective for any brand, and our meta-analysis of campaign FX data demonstrates that audio is doing this really well. This finding is reflected by a key insight from Radio Centre UK's Big Audio Data Mine project. It looked at the impact of various media planning factors upon the growth of advertising awareness. As the chart here illustrates, audience reach is clearly the driving force behind stronger ad awareness and therefore campaign performance. Now, that might seem surprising to some people, given that radio has historically been thought of as a frequency medium. Now, that doesn't mean that ad exposure frequency has zero influence on campaign outcomes, but rather it's the effect of that the effects of frequency are far outweighed by the impact of building higher reach on audio. And in a market like Ireland, where it's possible to achieve around 80% audience reach with radio in just 1 week, I think we shouldn't be surprised by a 26% uplift in ad awareness for brands using the medium. However, moving on now from the mechanics of audience reach, This meta-analysis also enables us to review how radio performs against harder to shift emotional metrics that also play a key role in creating future demand for a brand. So, brand likability is a very useful proxy for the affection or preference consumers have for a brand, which in turn will influence brand consideration and personal purchase decision-making. Growing likability for a brand can be hard and it can take time, but our data suggests that radio is an effective tool for this job. To measure likability, we ask survey respondents the following question: which one brand here do you like the most? The response to this question yields a very clear picture. We found that brand likability is, on average, almost 9 times, that's 900% higher for brands using radio, which is great news for radio advertisers. The gap in brand likability between brands using audio and those not on air can possibly be explained by radio's unique ability to build feelings of intimacy between listeners and their favorite radio stations. This, of course, has been evidenced in the past by studies that show listeners often perceive listening to radio as feeling like spending time with a friend. And our meta-analysis of campaign FX data suggests that radio advertisers can benefit from this powerful audience relationship when they use the medium effectively. In a similar vein, we also see radio generating significant uplifts in brand trust, which plays a crucial role in the formation of the usually quite small brand repertoires that people will consider when making a purchase decision across any number of product categories. Our question to survey respondents was simple: which of these brands is a brand that you trust? Across the 31 brands we collected data for, brand trust was 72% higher for brands using audio. Again, this is great news for radio advertisers. Historical analysis of the UK's IPA data bank reveals that ad campaigns using radio as part of their media mix generate 4 times the levels of brand trust compared to campaigns that don't feature radio. And we usually take it as a good sign when independent research studies reflect each other's findings. And so we're very pleased to see Campaign FX agreeing with the thrust of the IPA data bank on this metric. So far, the data has shown us how radio drives uplifts in awareness and how it can change the way people feel about a brand. All of this contributes to generating future demand by priming customers who are not yet ready to enter a specific market category, but will likely make a purchase at some point in the future. But what does the Campaign FX data reveal about radio's ability to convert existing demand, or in other words, winning a purchase from consumers who are ready to buy today? This leads on to the second key finding of the meta-analysis, which is that radio helps to convert existing or active consumer demand. Our data helps us understand the ability of radio advertising to drive purchase consideration amongst active buyers. Now, brand consideration is a critical metric that bridges awareness and purchase intent. The question we use to capture this is simple enough. When thinking about brands in a specified category, which of these brands would you consider using? Across the 31 brands we collected data for, brand consideration was 33% higher for brands using radio compared to brands that had not been on air. This is an important finding for advertisers. When consumers consider a brand and their interest is piqued, they tend to seek more information. And as we all know, in today's media environment, this curiosity usually drives people to search for specific brands online to learn more about competitive offerings, reviews, prices, and other relevant details. And we see strong evidence for this process at work in the Campaign FX data. To understand advertiser-related online search activity, we therefore ask a simple question. Have you searched online for information about any of these brands in the past 4 weeks? Across the 31 brands in our meta-analysis, we found that the uplift for online brand search was 45% higher for advertisers using radio. Again, this is great news for brands using radio because it directly relates to purchase intent, the final stage of the purchase process, where consumers are ready to buy, and we'll turn to that next. Brand consideration, as we just learned, is about evaluating and comparing different brands as potential options, often marked by online exploration and information gathering. In contrast, brand purchase intent refers to making a concrete decision to buy something. This is when consumers become focused on taking action and are ready to make a purchase. We capture this intent by asking the question, how likely are you to buy each of these brands within the next 3 months? Our meta-analysis of campaign effects data found that brand purchase intent was 55% higher for brands using radio advertising. This means that audio is an effective way to encourage in-market consumers towards a final purchase, often by helping people reach a positive emotional decision about their final brand choice. The probability of audio achieving this outcome tends to be increased by appreciating the insights gained from our third key headline, which is the best performing radio campaigns optimize audio creativity. Now, a key discovery of Radio Centre UK's Big Audio Data Mine project was that 8 of the top 10 creative attributes found in radio ads related to developing consistent audio elements. You can see these creative attributes in the chart here. They include music, voices, straplines, brand characters, and often sonic brand logos. But crucially, it was found these devices had to be deployed consistently over a long period of time across all of a brand's successive radio campaigns and the audio-visual content produced for media like TV and online video. Although we don't have all of the audio creative metadata available to the Big Audio Data Mine analysis, Campaign FX has yielded one important finding that reflects these insights. Creative standout, or the distinctiveness of ad creativity, measures how well a brand's advertising captures attention and differentiates itself from competitors. Within an audio context, consistent use of both distinctive and familiar sonic branding assets is by far the best way to get noticed and remembered by listeners. To capture this effect, we asked survey respondents, what brands here make adverts that really stand out? And notice that we don't specify adverts in any specific medium or channel. Across the 31 brands represented in the Campaign FX database, creative standout turned out to be 12% higher for brands using radio advertising. This is a fascinating finding, and it begs the question, why might audio advertising enhance perceptions of a brand's creative standout across all advertising channels? And we think the previous insights from Big Audio Data Mine can help provide an answer. Radio is a medium that relies solely on audio, which can lead brands to develop strong, memorable auditory cues for their ads. These audio elements, when used consistently, become deeply embedded in listeners' memories. When these familiar audio cues are then used in TV and online video content, or perhaps we'll concede vice versa, sometimes the audio patterning begins in video, they trigger recognition and recall of the brand, enhancing the overall impact of adverts across all media. We therefore think that radio serves as a foundational platform for building and reinforcing a brand's distinctive audio identity, which then elevates a brand's visibility and distinctiveness across all channels. Now, radio's role as a foundational platform for audio creativity can play a significant role in growing a brand's mental availability. Famously defined by Byron Sharp and his colleagues at the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, mental availability refers to the likelihood of a brand being thought of in a buying situation. This is driven by a brand's presence in the minds of consumers across various category entry points, which we often abbreviate to CEPs or SEPs. SEPs are situations or needs that trigger the thought of a brand. By using consistent and distinctive audio elements, brands can effectively embed themselves in the mental frameworks of consumers, and we see strong evidence of this occurring in the campaign FX data. The 5 survey waves that comprise our total dataset deployed a set of 8 category entry point questions that defined the key consumer needs specific to each brand category. The basic structure of the SEP questions was the same for each category and began as follows. Which of these brands do you strongly associate with? And this is then followed by an appropriate category entry point statement. And you can see here, for instance, with the finance category, which of these brands do you strongly associate with easy mobile banking for checking balances and payments, or expert help for investment and retirement plans? And we developed these SEPs for each of the categories that we undertook research for, and you can see them here. And it's quite detailed, and we're very pleased with what we learned. So let's take a look at that. Our meta-analysis has revealed that on average, brands that were advertising on radio were 29% more likely to be associated with relevant category entry points than brands that were not advertising on radio. And this is, we feel, a tremendous result. It demonstrates that brands can significantly enhance their creative standout and mental availability. And this is achieved by using radio as a foundational platform to develop and consistently reinforce a brand's distinctive audio identity over time across a wider range of media channels. So, this brings us to the end of this presentation. Before I hand over to Kieran for questions, I'd like to summarise the key findings of the study. So far as we're aware, Campaign FX represents the biggest combined analysis of audio advertising effectiveness ever undertaken in Ireland. It comprises data on the top 31 brands within the country across 5 key advertising categories, specifically personal banking, TV streaming, fast food, general insurance, and health insurance. The meta-analysis demonstrates how audio advertising creates future demand for advertisers by generating a 26% uplift in ad awareness, which makes consumers much more familiar with a brand. Radio advertising improves brand likability by a factor of almost 9 and boosts brand trust by 72%, thanks to its unique ability to build intimate relationships with listeners. Thanks to this meta-analysis, we also understand far more now about radio's ability to convert existing market demand. The data shows that audio advertising generates a 33% uplift in brand consideration, effectively moving consumers from awareness towards purchase. We also found that audio advertising leads to a 45% increase in online brand searches, thereby prompting listeners to seek more information online. And this, in turn, is related to the 55% uplift in brand purchase intent we discovered for brands using audio. And finally, creative standout is 12% higher for brands using audio, meaning that radio often serves as a foundational platform for building and reinforcing a brand's distinctive audio identity, which in turn elevates a brand's visibility and distinctiveness across all other media channels. So that's all from me. And now I'm going to hand back over to Kieran.
Many thanks, Jason. And we are going to go to Q&A in a few minutes. Please, anybody, if there is some questions in the Q&A button, so if anybody else wants to ask a question, please put them in. But before we go to Q&A, just to remind everybody, as Jason has just described, we have a huge amount of data across 31 brands, across 5 product categories. And what is available to anybody is the detailed analysis behind the meta-analysis you've seen. So, for example, if somebody wants to see their individual brand scores in terms of brand consideration, purchase intent, or how that brand performs in terms of category entry points, we can provide that data to you. We can also provide that data in a category context where you can look at the brand that you work on or your brand and how it relates to the competitors within that category. So if anybody wants any more detailed information at brand level or at category level across finance, TV streaming, fast food and delivery, general insurance, and health insurance, please contact me directly. My email is on the website, but it's also in the chat bar there. Just reach out to me and I can either provide that data to you electronically or arrange a presentation to you. And I think what can come out of that, because as we mentioned, it was only a moment in time, but if you see that moment in time and understand how your brand compares to competitors' brands, you can then look at what are the contributory factors to understand your score versus a competitor's score. So that information is very much available from now to anybody who would like it. So please do contact me. We are now going to go to the Q&A. So Jason, I have a few questions that have come up on the Q&A button. The first question is, like you mentioned in the research, it was a snapshot at a moment in time. You didn't know what advertisers would be using radio or not, so it gave a sense of real world credibility and authenticity. For the brands using audio, in most cases, they would have been using multimedia. It would have been part of a multimedia campaign. So how do you attribute the uplift that you showed during the presentation to the audio activity?
Thank you. It's a good question, and I'll try not to be too technical. This comes down to the test versus control methodology. We've got a belt and braces approach to how we do this. First of all, we want to know who are the people in the market that have had the most exposure to radio advertising, and who are the people that have had little to no exposure to radio advertising. The first group is the test group, the second group is the control group. What's interesting about the control group is that they haven't had any exposure to radio advertising, so whatever they feel or know about a brand won't have come from radio, okay? It will come from everything else that a brand is doing. So when we go and then ask the same questions about specific brands to the guys that have been listening to radio, if we see a difference between what the radio exposed group versus the non-exposed group are feeling and thinking about a brand, the only thing that we know is different about them, having controlled for all the demographics like age and gender and where they live in the country, having control for all of those factors, all that's left really is the exposure to radio as a factor. So it's reasonable to assume that the gaps or the uplifts between exposed versus non-exposed is due to the effects of radio advertising. To belt and braces that, we then look at the difference in the brands that have been on radio versus the brands that have not been on radio, and that kind of like further purifies the result. So we've got very high confidence with this approach that we take in Ireland. And it was driven mainly by the fact that this is a smaller market where the size of campaigns in terms of their value often didn't justify a huge expense in research. So we had to rethink the way that we did it. And to be honest, as the guy that designed Radio Gauge in the UK, I'm actually very proud of what we've now done for Campaign FX. In many respects, I would say it's a superior methodology, and I'd like to see more markets across Europe and further afield adopt it.
Pretty good. And kind of related question, you mentioned that historically exposure to audio advertising has been shown to boost awareness of brands' marketing activity across other channels. You refer to it as the virtual TV or virtual digital effect, and we saw clear evidence of that during your presentation. Can you just explain a little bit more how that works?
Yeah, the virtual TV effect is quite an old phrase, and I remember when I first began working in radio nearly 30 years ago. It was a well-known technique for explaining to heavy TV advertisers why they should consider adding radio to their schedule. And the way that we used to describe it then, and it's still relevant now, is that if you've seen a TV ad, which you've paid a lot of money for, I mean, TV ads are not cheap things. Anyone on this webinar will understand that. That will be remembered and retained to a greater or lesser degree in memory. But what research discovered is that if you are using the same audio cues, like the same music or the same characters' voices and sonic logos from TV and putting those into your radio ads, we were finding that radio listeners, when they heard those sonic cues, were immediately remembering the visuals that they'd seen on TV. Now, that's still happening, and it's happening with the visuals that they've seen on digital platforms as well. And so, in some respects, a radio ad is the cheapest TV ad that you will ever buy. That's what we always used to say. And that effect is still occurring. And given the proliferation of platforms that are now using audiovisual content and radio's ability to probably bed in the pattern of remembrance and memory around a brand's sound, we think that's probably what's happening. It's just remarkable to see in most markets, in every market I do research in. If you've been exposed to radio, you are more sensitive to everything else a brand has been doing across other channels. And so far, that's the best explanation I can give for why it works.
Okay, thank you very much. Obviously, the researchers showed there, you showed a big uplift in all the metrics in awareness, advertising awareness, purchase intent, consideration, category entry points. So they're very compelling and powerful results. Now, in Ireland, audio has a healthy share of total advertising spend, but based on those results, you would imagine the share could be higher. Based on your experience working in research over many years, and media research in particular, what's your hypothesis for why share isn't high?
Well, I think the best theory I've ever heard and contributed towards about this question would be that radio's too cheap. Now, what do I mean by that? We sell it too cheaply. Compare it with TV, for instance. TV is very expensive to buy as a media asset. It's also expensive to create. You go on a production weekend making a TV ad, and you'll see why it's expensive. It's great fun as well, but it's definitely expensive to make video. What that has meant is that if you make a stinker of a TV campaign, it can be a career-limiting moment for you. And I think the incentive to not make bad TV adverts has basically contributed towards the amount of research that's gone into making good TV adverts. Allied to that, the cost of a TV advert relative to what it costs to research it is not bad. It's quite a gap. It's not like that in audio. Audio tends to be not the main line on the budget, and it takes a lower share all over, which means the risk for anyone booking audio isn't as great if it doesn't work out that well. And given that the campaign values very often don't justify the expense of research, nobody's learning, really. And I think that undermines people's confidence in the medium. And it also makes it less visible or impactful at the emotional level for the people booking audio. You don't go to the pub and say, oh, I heard your radio campaign, but you might go to the pub and say to a friend, saw your TV ads, brilliant. So all of those things have been in the mix, and I think help explain why radio's share of ad spend is probably less than the impact it's contributing.
Okay, many thanks, Jason. A few questions I just want to read out here. Could you explain the linkage to web traffic a little more? I could be wrong, but it looks like there's correlation rather than causation, especially considering the size of brands in question. The reality of the fact is they will be searched independent of consuming the audio ad.
That is an interesting question. I've just come out of a very long program of research with Radio Centre UK, where we've been looking at the true impact of radio's ability to drive web traffic. And we've been doing that using Google Analytics data and using multiple regression analysis to line up what's been happening on a radio schedule with what's been happening in terms of traffic patterns. And we actually began that work here in Ireland with the Sky TV project that Kieran mentioned at the top of this webinar. So we've got incontrovertible evidence now in this market and in the UK that radio does have a direct impact on the traffic and browsing behavior of consumers who have been exposed to radio advertising. What's really interesting, though, is that it doesn't happen immediately. And we can understand this very simply by remembering that 9 out of 10 people, according to the Touchpoint survey in the UK, when they're listening to radio, are engaged in a primary activity. To put that in a nutshell, it's not controversial to acknowledge that no one really is swerving off the road into the nearest lay-by to respond to an ad they've just heard on the radio. Usually most response for attribution is measured in the first few minutes, but radio response, 25% of it only occurs in the first hour. 8% of it only occurs in the first, I don't know, 8 to 10 minutes after the ad goes out. It can take up to 19 hours for the full response effect for a radio ad to happen. And the regression modeling that we've done shows that really, really well. And what I think we've just shown here today is a top line measure of that effect at work. But we now understand in granular detail the mechanics and the process of it through the regression. So this is great when you've got research studies all linking together and showing, you know, how radio and how audio affects things like browsing behavior at a very granular level.
And just to add to that, for the person who asked the question, so the research that Jason refers to is on the Radio Centre Ireland website. So the Irish research was when we partnered with Sky and we used their Google Analytics, and we basically looked at regression analysis measuring radio activity with direct website traffic to the campaign landing page for that piece of activity. And it did show that 72% of the website traffic was attributable to that radio activity. But there was a delayed effect in terms of response, as Jason alluded to. And also on the website is the UK research. Similar research looked at different brands, was 4 different brands was looked at in the UK, and they also produced very similar research, which did show the correlation between radio activity and search behavior and website traffic. If you can't find it on the website and you want more details, just as I said, my email is on the chat. Just reach out to me directly and I can provide that to you. And in fact, if you need the team to go out and present to you, very happy to do so. This next question, I'll probably just take this one, Jason, because it's a very straightforward one. Is there any data available for the travel and transport category? Not at the moment. We may look at other categories. We did stop the research after 5 categories because we had such a bank of data. We want to do the meta-analysis on it, but we may look at that in the future. And again, if you want to contact me directly on the email on the chat, we can have a chat about that too. And then next question, just the question is the effects you saw, what reach is needed to achieve, what for the effects you saw, what reach is needed to be achieved on average? I think that refers to Jason, and this is a bit of UK research specifically, was when it was reach rather than frequency was the biggest contributor to overall campaign effects. Do you have any more details on what the reach required was?
Well, the Irish and the UK markets in terms of radio are very, very different. So they're not directly comparable, but the mechanics are pretty much the same. To explain, in the UK, of course, we have the BBC, which doesn't carry any commercial ad content at all. And that affects the amount of audience you can reach with commercial radio in the UK. I think you can reach something like 60%, I think it is now, of the UK audience, of the UK population using commercial radio. But I would say in the UK, a strong kind of weekly reach for a campaign is round about 30-35% audience reach. You guys are totally lucky in a completely different way that it's possible to reach 80% of the market in 1 week using commercial radio in Ireland. Now, what does that mean in terms of what the optimum reach might be? We don't have the reach data to tell you that definitively, but what we do have is the spend data. And what we haven't shown you today is that the relationship between share of voice in radio and the results that we see for individual brands is a very, very tight relationship. Kieran, would you agree with that?
Yeah, and we have some more data on that actually, and I could provide that to you. We did compare share of voice by category with the increase in effect, and there was a correlation. And just to add, we are trying to gather all the reach data for those 31 brands. We don't have all of that data yet, but we have quite a bit of it, and we're just hoping to get the missing pieces for the brands that we don't have that data. And we are looking at doing an extra piece of work, which is specifically looking at the correlation between reach and weekly reach planned and effects, but we don't have that quite to hand as yet. I think that is the last question, and I'm delighted to say we managed to finish just 5 minutes early. So I'd like to thank everybody for your time. I know how busy things can be, so I really appreciate everybody taking the time. And I said, if anybody wants any further updates or further questions or further details, please reach out to me directly. The webinar, the recording, and the summary of today's presentation and the presentation deck will be available on the Radio Centre Ireland website tomorrow. So many thanks, everyone, and have a great afternoon.